All right, ladies, we are on. Welcome to another installment of Freedom Summer 2020. I'm glad that everyone is with us today. And if you have not already had the opportunity to visit our website, thefreedomsummer.org, I want to remind you to please do so once this discussion ends. Don't leave the discussion unless you can do it at the same time. But please go on to thefreedomsummer.org, which is on the bottom of our screen, and register for our events, register for the academy, and definitely register to vote and check your voting status if you have not done so. So I'm glad and excited to be here tonight because tonight we have with us a set of ladies, and some will be joining us throughout this event, who are working with organizations within our church, mission councils, missionary societies within our church. We know that in many of our Black churches, we have several ministries, several organizations that are doing the work of Jesus. However, there's some organizations that we need to that are always out there, and as one of them described it to me, have their boots on the ground, but we don't always have that opportunity to engage in their day-to-day work and what they're doing. And with missionaries, I think we often think so strictly about global missions, and we don't often hear about or engage or acknowledge the work that they're doing in our communities, in our churches, not just in terms of going out there and feeding and spreading the gospel of Christ, but also the work and how they're spreading the gospel with respect to civic engagement, and in this case, voter registration. So I'm glad to have with us today Miss Angela Davis Baxter, who is the first vice president of the AME Zion Women's Home and Overseas Missionary Society,
Good
as well.
evening.
Thank you. Thank you for being here, as well as Dr. Charmaine Cohen of the Women's Missionary Society, who is the voter registration coordinator for the First Episcopal District of the African Methodist Episcopal Church. Welcome, ladies.
Thank you.
I'm so glad that you were able to join us, and we know that several others will join us shortly. So let's go ahead and just jump in and begin this conversation. So one of the things that I was thinking about with the missionary work, and I just want people to get an idea and a better handle of the work that you've been doing, is I've been reminded of a book that I recently read or encountered in seminary, which really has struck a chord with me, by Raphael Warnock. Many of you might be familiar with him because not only is he the pastor of Ebenezer Baptist Church in Georgia, but he's also running for Senate for Georgia. And in his book, The Divided Mind of the Black Church, he asked the question, as an instrument of salvation through Jesus Christ, is the mission of the Black church to save souls, or is it to transform the social order? And personally, I think the answer to that question is to do both. But that has been a question that has sat on my heart for a while. That's part of what drives me to do this work. And as missionaries, many people understand that you go out into the highways and the byways, right? Spreading the gospel of Christ and serving the needs of individuals in communities. But too often they separate that from the work of justice or the fight and struggle for justice and equity in this country, when this is also considered the work of Christ, right? So on that note, what I would like for you to tell us is about the work of your missionary societies and councils, right? In this time, as it relates to civic engagement and confronting injustice and inequities faced by Black and Brown communities in this country. And why should the church be giving attention to these issues?
So, Reverend Cupid, if I may start, I would love to share.
Please.
Very important question. Why should the church give any attention to this? I'm going to start with this. So in the AME Church, our organization, the Women's Missionary Society, we have a mission statement that is very clear and concise. And in it is a reminder that we are called and we are sent to continue the ministry of Jesus Christ, both by service and witness in the world. Witness evangelism. Now, the service is what we do to help God's people, okay? Feed the hungry, provide shelter to the homeless, clothing the naked. And as ambassadors of Jesus Christ, we are to be the voice for the voiceless.
Right.
This means we should speak on behalf of the people whose pleas for justice aren't being heard or can't be heard because they're no longer with us. For example, George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, and a lot more. And since we are Christians, and since we are missionaries, since we are pastors and laymen, we must give attention to the injustices and the inequities. Now, historically, if you can think back with me, the church has been the forefront of civil rights movement. Excuse me. Now, it's where all of the meetings took place, where the strategies were discussed and formed. And our people looked for the church for guidance. Now, as a church community, we need to go back to those basics and be that voice crying out in the wilderness and speaking out against racial profiling, police brutality, and racism. Now, bringing it back, we can't afford as a church to just sit and turn a blind eye. We can't do that. And we certainly should not have non-believers be more visible than us, the church believers.
Thank you for that, Dr. Cohen. Welcome, Miss Martin, Charlotte Martin.
Hello, my dear. How are you?
Yes, and I'm going to just introduce you briefly. Miss Charlotte Martin is the first vice president of the Women's Missionary Society for the African Methodist Episcopal Church on the connectional level. And we're now addressing the question of what is the work of missionary societies in this time as it relates to civic engagement and confronting injustice and inequities faced by Black and Brown communities. So I thank you, Dr. Cohen, for making that clarification, explaining that mission. And I'm going to turn to you, Ms. Davis Baxter, to add to that.
Yes. So in the Women's Home and Overseas Missionary Society of the African Methodist Episcopal Zion Church, we have our quadrennial theme, the Great Commission, #Mission Matters. And we have been globally committed to social justice. That was one of our first components. So the missionaries in the AME Zion Church, we have been engaging. We have taken part in demonstrations after the George Floyd murder in the streets, demanding that justice be done. So we have missionaries across the United States, overseas, who see the injustices that our Black and Brown communities face every day. And it often brings me back to Martin Luther King Jr. said, injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. Therefore, we must remember when abuse takes place down the street, it's just a matter of time that it's going to be up the street on our street. So we are very committed to social justices and to meet the needs of our community, the Black and Brown community.
Thank you. Ms. Martin, would you like to add to that?
I certainly would, Minister Cupid. And I want to thank my sister, Dr. Charmaine, for so eloquently going over dealing with our mission and our purpose, because it was so well stated. We are also, one thing that we do that brings it home is that we do not work alone. We join in with the Church Women United. We are affiliated with the National Council of Negro Women. In that organization, I know they are affiliated with all the sororities, the Black groups. That brings us all in. We're stronger when we're together.
Right.
We are members of the Black Women's Agenda. When we pull all of these women together and we work toward the common goal of ministering to the less fortunate, we do it on a global scale. We look to bring peace, justice, and we deal with human rights issues that so often are like they are in this country today. I say to you, things that we're facing are not new. Jim Crowism has been in existence long before we began, and every generation has its own ills and problems to overcome. And that's why we are here, to help overcome those things. We're proud to be a part of the Mercy Ship. It's something new we started this year. It's a floating hospital to tend to those in need. I am truly happy to be here. I'm late getting on. I've talked with the text, so I've had myself a wonderful time.
That's okay. We're glad to have you here. Whenever you show up, we're glad. We're happy. So, I'm so glad that you mentioned, in your conversation, you were saying that this is not new. What we're seeing, what we're going through is not new. And I find that so interesting because it isn't new. What's new to us is this pandemic that we've been experiencing, right? But the pandemic of COVID-19. But the racial injustice that we've seen and we've been experiencing is not new. But for some reason, which I think is clear and evident, the work has always been critical for liberation of Black and Brown communities. But even though it's not new, there is a sense of urgency that is taking place right now, right? I think that we can all agree that the atmosphere is different, the environment is different, and there is an urgency. Why we see what's taking place in this country with the division, with the disparities in healthcare, with the leadership. So I would like you to speak about some of this urgency that currently exists, and what are the policies that the Black church and voters should be focusing on during this election season, and why that's so important. Because we want people to get this message that they have to get out and vote. Right. So what are the policies that we need in place and that we need to be talking about in this moment of urgency?
Well, Minister Cupid, I think you just pointed them out. Things that we have got to deal with affordable health care for people of color. We must have jobs. The workforce, it's horrible. We're not well represented. We're underpaid. Last hired, first fired, and so forth. Our housing issues, they redline our districts. You can't get loans to buy houses in Black areas. They go in. I don't need to get on my soapbox. Education. So my question, who better than the church? Who better than the church to come in, step in, and address these issues with their members? And the people who are not their members, the folks in the community, they need this. They need us. And we can call them. I know we're facing COVID right now. Most things are done through Zoom, through your various media. And it takes that because we still must reach. We must reach those people. all people, our people, us.
Right.
Mhm.
Thank you. We seem to be having some feedback. So if anyone has any additional
I don't know what to do with that. I'm hearing a
opening, you have
terrible
to open on another
feedback as
screen or
well.
anything, or you can mute unless you're talking.
Okay. So I'd like to chime in if Sister Charlotte, if she's finished. Okay. All right. So Reverend Cupid, you said urgency. Urgency is an excellent word. And you asked, what policy should the church be focused on? I believe first, we need to be aware and concerned that the Voting Rights Act of 1965 has expired. And that's a very important policy because this piece of legislation, if you remember, prohibited racial discrimination in voting. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So now the safeguards have been removed that prevented voter suppression,
Right.
done in 2013 by the Supreme Court. And you may know that Mr. John Lewis was working on that before he passed away. So
Mm-hmm.
now we are witnessing voter suppression right now with the boxes being removed or even locked, polling sites being changed without timely notice. The church need to work with Congress to reinstate the Voting Rights Act of 1965. That needs to be done. That should be a priority for the church. Now, also, as a church, we need to focus on other policies. And Sister Charlotte mentioned many of them already. We need to focus on restoring the economy, eliminating overt racism, and eliminating this pandemic. And how do we do that? By following the science and the experts. So
Mm-hmm.
are the policies I believe the church needs to work on. Because if these areas are not improved, guess what? We're going to, as a community, we're going to remain in a state of flux, waking up, wondering where are we going, how are we going.
Mm-hmm.
Policy need to be fixed right away and addressed. Thank you.
Hi, Miss. Anything you would like to add, Angela? You're on mute.
Gotta get used to that. No, oh ma'am.
Okay. So we spoke about the Voting Rights Act and the amendments that have been made and the importance for the church to go out and speak about this and you know we will continue to advocate for changes to be made, for adoptions to be made, but in the meantime we do have an issue that is real, which I think Dr. Cohen you spoke about, this voter suppression that is taking place. Right, we know that it's taking place in several forms, based on the Supreme Court's decision with the Voting Rights Act, which struck several provisions, multiple provisions from that act. And many states have adopted voter ID laws that have made it more difficult for people to register. And then there's several other forms of disenfranchisement and suppression in voting. What are some ways that we can, I don't want to say get around it, because I don't want us to get around it to a point that we don't try to fix what's happening, but we know this issue is right before us. We see what's taking place in the conversations revolving around our post office. What do we do? Recently, in her address at the DNC, Michelle Obama mentioned that we have to get out there, and if you have to pack your lunch and get online, be prepared. So we know that these tactics are already in place. What can we tell voters about their approach to voting, about some of the ways to get around these tactics, right? We see the move, we see the chessboard, so to speak. So now we got to plan our next move.
Mr. Lisa?
Yes, please.
Yeah, I would say that early voting will be very important, as well as helping our elderly or individuals who are disabled with absentee ballots. As missionaries, you can, and a lot of people probably don't know this, but you can go to your election office and ask for an absentee ballot form. Anyone can get the form. Take it to your individuals who can't get out, who can't go to the election polls, and actually sit down, help them fill it out. Take it back to the election office yourself. Take it back. Now, when you get there, they do ask you to sign, and it usually wants you to be the next of kin related to the person. However, if not, if the person gives you permission to say that this is my absentee ballot form, I know in the state of North Carolina, as well as in South Carolina, you can do that. You can take that back to the election office and get the ballot sent to the individual. Also, with early voting, it's important that if you can early vote, to do that. Your ballot will be cast. And then that would leave, I would hope, the line smaller during November 3rd election, so people won't have to stand in line. The employers won't have to say, well, you only get 3 hours off and the line is 8 hours. So take advantage of the opportunities for early voting on Saturdays, the early voting on the weekends, that would help with voter suppression. And then if you're in line on November 3rd and you see something wrong, we ought to be courageous enough as women to stand up and say, this is not right. I have witnessed that. I have been at a polling booth and someone needed assistance. They had someone with them. If that person asks for their assistance to help them, they have a right. But people, they say no. But elderly, you think of a 90-year-old lady or someone who really can't read or write and they need your assistance. If they take you to the polls with them and want you to stand there and read the ballot to them, you have a right. And so we need to know that. You just can't, because sometimes the poll workers will say, oh, you can't do that. And I learned that is my right. That happened with me and my mom. And that was her right. She asked me, she's 90, she asked me to assist her. I had the right to do that. So just knowing the rights of your state is very important. And I think that we should, as missionaries, provide that information to congregations that don't know. And if we don't know, reach out to our local officials, reach out to the election board. Because if you're like me, I go to my poll, there's somebody there working that I know. So reach out to them prior to that, just to say, what is it that we need to do for the Black and brown communities to make sure on election day that none of my brothers and sisters will be turned away. So check the election office to make sure your name is there, because you can register to vote just by going to the election of your local election office and fill out the application. I mean, paperwork, not application, but the paperwork to be registered to vote.
That's good. That's good. Thank you for that. Ms. Martin.
Minister Elisa. And I thank you, Angela, because that is so, I think it was the late John Lewis. If you see something, you should say something. And it's our obligation to say something. We must mobilize our people, and then we become a team of one. We do whatever it takes to get people to the polls. In our district, our bishop has shared with us that he's made the request that every person in our district to take 10. It's called social networking. We must get 10 people and carry 10 with us so that we know that we are where we should be and we're making a difference. I am so excited about the fact that we have a female, a woman, a Black woman, Kamala Harris, getting ready to go into the office, who is running for vice president. If that's not a reason for us Black women to get up, go do something, go vote, take mother, sister, brother, everyone, make sure they get to the poll. We can be an encourager even in our local congregations. And yes, we still meet. We still have church. We know that COVID is going on. And we're going to tell our people to get their sanitizer. put on their face masks and their gloves. We're going to do all of those things. And we're going to get to the poll to vote. And we're going to help them to get to the polls to vote. It's our obligation. We are women and we are proud. And we are so proud to have the first Black female running for first vice president of the United States of America. And God is pleased.
Amen.
Thank you, ladies.
So, Minister Cupid, I'd like to kind of comment back on Sister
Just jump in.
Okay. So, I agree with you. We have a responsibility to vote. And as citizens, we have to do our part of the contract, and that is to vote. And as she had said earlier, if you feel someone has violated your vote, then you be brave enough to start the legal process with the Attorney General. Now, one of the things I like to share that we're doing in the First Episcopal District, and I like all of the strategies that Sister Angela mentioned. Those are awesome, and I'll certainly carry those back with me in our district. We started a voting campaign called Operation Vote Now. And it is a model that is very strategic and very intentional, with a heavy emphasis, though, at the grassroots level, and that's at the local church. So what we're doing is we're assigning individuals to be area vote coordinators, and we're also assigning local church captains. Sister Charlotte, I see you smiling, so we must be doing something right, okay? So those local church captains, they will target our seniors. They're going to target another population, those young people, 18 to 26, that we forget about. They need to get registered and they need to get voted. And, you know, a lot of them don't really feel like it's necessary to vote. So we have to capture them, educate them, and help them get to the polling place. Okay. So with this model, we're not just simply saying, everybody, remember, you must vote. You must vote. We've been passive like that for years. We can't afford to do that now. We can't say vote. We have to make sure people understand why they need to vote. And once they understand why they need to vote, that will motivate them to vote.
Okay, thank you for that, Dr. Cohen. So one of the things, and I think you've all touched in this, of course, we're in the time of COVID. We're in this season of a pandemic. So I'm just interested in finding out, what have you been doing as missionaries? What have your councils and your societies been doing? Or how are you doing things differently and reimagining this approach to mobilizing and organizing people to get out and vote when we could no longer be present in our physical church buildings? What does that look like today?
Okay, can I go again?
Yeah, sure. Just jump in.
Okay. So one of the things that some of the missionary societies have been doing is in collaboration with COVID testing. We set up voter registration drives during the COVID testing time in collaboration with NAACP, the sororities and fraternities within the local communities. We and as people are coming through with the COVID testing, it's nice to give them a bottle of water and ask them as they're coming through, are you registered to vote? Mask on, gloves on, doesn't hurt anything to have a clipboard in your hand and for churches to go around to make sure people are registered to vote. And some people are registered and those are not. And at that opportunity, they're given a form to complete so that they can become registered to vote.
Okay.
That is so inspiring, Sister Angela, because I love it. I love it. And in all districts in the AME Church, we are all doing little different things and doing them differently. Many are utilizing, in fact, some of the churches are partnering with their sorority and coming together. And I know we're doing some teaching, my sorority,
Mm-hmm.
AKA, we're teaching online
Mm-hmm.
in the evenings, answering questions. And then not only that, the other side of that, other component, we have to do, as Sister Angela said, we must go ye therefore.
Mm-hmm.
We have to go to the people and get them.
Mm-hmm.
And y'all, we have to take them by the hand if necessary. And those groups, I love that. That's from old school, where you have team captains, and uh, Dr. Charmaine is familiar with that term. I mean, and that's the way they did it long ago, and it was called the grassroots approach.
Mm-hmm.
And
Got to
you
get
had
back to the
precincts.
basics. Mm-hmm.
Same thing. You cover the precinct,
Mm-hmm.
and you make sure those people got to the polls. So we still have to return to that. We still have to do
Yes.
that.
Mm-hmm. And
Thank you.
Charlotte said,
That's up, of course.
I'm sorry, Sister Charlotte mentioned educating. That's also what we're doing in our campaign model. We are educating. And each church, there's a video that we have together and a presentation about why you should vote and how. And we're asking each church to play that video, whether as a church conference or as class leader style, where one individual who has a group of people they're responsible for, show it to them. So when you do that, you give people an opportunity to ask questions and get a better understanding, because voting during this COVID season is scary to a lot of folk. So once we explain how they can vote via absentee ballot, they can feel a little bit more at ease and more apt to do that. So that's one of the things we're doing. We're pounding in their education. And again, once they know why and understand why, they get that motivation, and then they will do it. Some of our missionaries are also doing the voter registration drive. And here in our district, it's also been suggested that we get one person to go around and pick up all of those ballots and deliver them in person to the Board of Education, Board of Election, and make sure they get accepted and get a receipt. So that way, we're not just trusting the mailing system, because we don't know what's going to happen. You know, a lot of votes for our primary did not get counted on the ballot because they weren't stamped from the post office. Even though that ballot said no postage necessary, the post office didn't stamp it because it said it didn't need postage. But they weren't counted because it didn't get a postage mark on it. Okay. So once we know that these things are going on, we then begin to adjust and adapt, and we overcome it so that we can get our votes in and counted. And one thing also I want to share before I close is make sure we don't do things at the last minute. Election is November 3rd. We got almost 2 months, a little less than 2 months. Now is the time to get registered. Now is the time to start asking for or applying for that absentee ballot. Now's the time to do this. Don't wait until 2 days before or the 9th hour. You got to start working on that now.
Thank you, Dr. Cohen. That is so important. The planning, the plan, because with all these obstacles that we see popping up everywhere, it's important that we get ahead of them and we start planning and not wait till that last minute. So I thank you for that point. One of the concerns that I have is that, yes, you know, we are encouraging, and I encourage everyone to get out there and vote, not to wait till last minute. But we do have those individuals who may still be questioning, why should they go out there and vote, right? Some of them went out and voted in 2016, and they're saying, look how that turned out, right? Some of them are not excited about the candidates that we have before us, right? And that's real. Even though we celebrate Kamala Harris being a person of color and on the ticket as vice president, there's some that still question whether she will represent our communities in the right way. So what I would like you to speak to is, how do we speak to those that have given up in despair, those that have some sort of apathy towards the system, who look back at 2016 and says, look, we saw what happened with the popular vote, right? Why should we go back out there? What do we say to those folks who are saying they don't think it's worth it, they don't think it's important? How do you encourage them and give them hope?
Minister Cupid, that's it. That's what we must do. We must give them hope. We must encourage them. For it's been now Amendment 19 giving women the right to vote. It's been 100 years.
100.
But for Black women, what's it been? More like 50 years, 60 years? Have we ever thought about sharing the truth with our children and our loved ones? That people gave their life. Folks have died so that we might have the right to vote. And then there was a time Black folks had to pay poll tax. They had to pay to go vote. I don't think a lot of our young people know the history of what voting means to Black folks.
And some
voting and some adults. And I do agree, Dr. Charmaine. It is almost a cardinal sin to not go vote. My great-grandmother who could not vote, looking down and tracing back, I'm just so moved when I think about the right to vote. And I can remember couldn't wait till I was old enough so I could go cast my vote. We've got to encourage them. We need to tell them your vote is your voice. No vote, no voice. You will never get to where you're trying to go if you don't vote. And if it doesn't turn out the way you wanted it to, you can't give up.
That's right.
You got to keep on going, keep on climbing that staircase, keep on these glass ceilings. We can't stop. I think that we don't encourage our young people enough. The ones that feel that they don't have to vote, that it won't make a difference. And ladies, don't you recall elections or have heard of elections where one vote made a difference?
Yes.
We had election for our representatives, state representatives. It was a runoff because someone passed. Do you know they deadlocked twice with the same number of votes? It does matter.
Yes, it does.
And the person that we really had hoped would get in, she got in. But it's no joke. So one vote can matter. Every vote matters. So but be sure to tell them that your vote is your voice.
Is your voice. I love that.
And no vote, no voice.
No voice.
All right. No vote, no voice.
And to add on to what Sister Charlotte has said, I will also remind them there are three main reasons why they should vote. One, they have the right to vote. And Sister Charlotte mentioned it already. There were so many laws that were put into place to give us that right. I mean, a lot. We had the 15th Amendment that granted Black people the right to vote in 1870. Then we had the Civil Rights Act of 1964 that made us Black people full citizens with equal rights, okay? Then we had the Voting Rights Act of 1965, because even though we were given full rights as citizens, we still really weren't able to vote because of all of the voter suppression. So that Voting Rights Act of 1965, that came into place, and that prohibited, like I mentioned earlier, racial discrimination in voting. And then we had the 19th Amendment, okay? So I will remind them, laws were put into place, and laws were put into place to enforce the previous law so that they could have the right to vote. The second reason why they should vote, they have the power. Sister Charlotte said If your vote is your voice. They have the power to put politicians in office that will meet our needs. And if they're not meeting our needs or not even trying to meet our needs, we now have the power to vote them out of office when the time comes. We have to know that we have the power. And when more than just one get together, we can change things. And lastly, I'm just going to reiterate what Sister Charlotte said. We are obligated to vote because there were so many people who were beaten and died for our right to vote. Everybody heard of Bloody Sunday that took place in Selma, Alabama, when everybody marched across the Edmund Pettus Bridge. And what happened? Bloody Sunday happened. Even the late John Lewis, he was involved in that march, and he was beaten and received a concussion. So they're obligated to vote because people shed blood for their right. And I'd like to share this one thing that Shirley Chisholm said, who was the first Black woman to run for president. She said, the one thing you've got going, and that is your vote.
Thank you
Awesome,
for
sister.
that. I'm going to
Sister.
extend that question to you, Angela, to express the importance of getting out there for those that may be doubtful, may have despair, but also to speak at what's at stake in not getting out there. When we look at the current environment.
Okay. Well, I'm going to go here. We can just look back at our 2016 election. That would be one of the major reasons that we should get out and vote. Because if we look at how the administration is in Washington, D.C. at this point, and how our Black and brown communities are being affected through health care, we talked about that earlier, our educational system, and just so many number of things that have impacted, because we stayed at home in 2016 because we did not see excitement in Hillary Clinton. So we decided that we would just stay home in the Black and brown community. We can't afford to do that this time. So that is encouragement enough. When someone now is sitting at home who got a $600 on unemployment because their job ended, but now they're back down to maybe getting $100 a week. That's no money to live on. Evictions. Who are getting evicted? Black and brown community individuals. So why should we vote? Because if you're like me, I want a roof over my head. I want a job. And I want my children, your children, grandkids, all over this world to have an education. From elementary to college. Our HBCUs are targeted. Yes, that's our Black and brown communities. So why should we vote? Because we have all these things at stake. And just to look at where we are today, we don't want to continue that. And it's going to take us decades, at least 2 decades, to get back on track to where we are now, to where we need to be in this country. So I would say that would encourage me just enough. I'm not really considered a young adult because they said that's age 22 to 40, but I'm not that much past 40. But as in my young adult population, as they would call themselves, that's enough for us to go out and vote, because this is really impacting. It will impact you for years to come. The decisions that you make today, talking about doing away with Social Security, the payroll tax, Social Security benefits. Oh my goodness, what will we do when we're 65 or we live to see it? What will we do when we're 80 or 90? How will we live? How will we get our medicine? How will we function? Because we'll need all those resources, because the longer you live, my mother always told me, you will have things that you will need in life, in healthcare and different things just to survive. So that would give, I hope, the courage for individuals and young adults and those that's 18 to 26 that cannot see it right now, but how their life will change their lives, what they do today as a youth, a young adult in life, as we look on this 2020 election.
I thank you for that. That's so important. And I think the thing that we need to stress and remember, remind people also is that, yes, this is a big election because, we have the presidential candidates. It's a national election, but this is just as important on every level of government, from local, state, national level. It's on the state and the local levels that decisions about policing are being made, decisions or conversation with unions are being made. So we need to pay attention to what's going on every level of government and get out there and vote. The final thing is we're wrapping up right now. We're actually at our time. So I'm just going to ask each of you to just take a few seconds and just make some closing or final remarks. I'll begin with you, Ms. Charolette.
Thank you, Minister Cupid. And I thank my fellow panelists, my sister Angela, and my dear sister, Dr. Charmaine. I am honored to have sit on this panel with you. My closing words are, I have been inspired by many things that you have said, because it still boils down to we must educate, and educate. Dr. Charmaine, I'm going to get every one of those years down that you mentioned and be able to articulate it as you did. I am proud and thankful to you, Minister Cupid, for inviting me. It was a privilege and an honor to sit today. I merely say, God bless. I thank you for this opportunity. Thank you.
Dr. Cohen?
Okay. I share the sentiments like Sister Charlotte. I'm honored to be a part of this panel discussion. I really appreciate the invitation. And just hearing from Sister Angela, who is from, is it the CME or AME Zion?
Amy Zion.
Okay.
Amy
Hear
Zion.
from, okay, good to hear from her from the AME Zion, hear the wonderful things that they're doing as missionaries, trying to get our folks to the polls and trying to make a difference. Our theme in the First Episcopal District is you're called to make a difference. And I see that they're doing that there. And it's an honor to be able to connect with Sister Charlotte, who is the connectional First Vice President, to be in your presence. I appreciate that. And again, I love this forum because it's educating the public, it's educating the people, because they might have the same type of questions. Why should I vote? What about the COVID? Is it necessary? Am I going to make a difference? So I'm glad you're having this in place so that we can educate our people. And it looks like that we're all are working together to make a difference. And there's an African proverb, now I'll close with this. If you want to go far, go alone. No, if you want to go quick, go alone. But if you want to go far, do it together. And that's what I see that we're doing. We're all doing God's work together, making a difference. Thank you.
Miss Angela, I turn it over to you.
Okay. Thank you so much for the opportunity to be a part of this panel. It has been wonderful. I have been really enjoyed my sisters from the AME Church. I'm really excited to be on this panel with you tonight. But I will leave with you just a little something that the AME Zion Church is doing as it focuses on voter registration. We know the critical moment that we're facing. Mm-hmm. So the Women's Home Overseas Missionary Society encourages women through our Purple at the Polls campaign. And our board of bishops, under the leadership of our president, Bishop George D. Crenshaw, has launched Project 100. And Project 100 is to encourage 100% of our AME Zion brothers and sisters that are eligible to vote to cast their vote
Everyone
in the 2020 election for all offices, not just the president, but for all offices. And I would hope that my brothers and sisters in all the Black denominations, Methodist denominations, as well as those who are listening tonight, would take voting serious and cast their vote. Because I'm just reminded, you are to be the change you want to see in this world. Thank you.
Thank you, ladies. I thank you for joining us this evening and sharing your wisdom, your experience, and everything that you are doing as missionaries, boots on the grounds for our churches. I remind everyone who's listening to please visit thefreedomsummer.org, register to vote, check your voting registration to make sure that you are registered, to find out where you vote, and also request those mail-in ballots. In this time of pandemic, the best thing to do would be to fill out those mail-in ballots and get it in. So we pray that you would all not wait till last minute, but plan ahead, because we see the challenges that we face. Thank you, everyone. Have a good evening.